Get Pucked. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Get Pucked podcast. Dave, Vito, and Matt here. Apparently, I didn't see that we hit the start button. What's going on, guys?
What's up?
Pay
attention. Keep up.
Okay, to be fair, real fast, normally there's a little thing that says...
It said it.
Yeah, but now it just said it. Anyways, all right, it's fine. Technical difficulties aside, let's talk about some hockey. Okay, so obviously hot topics, Zegras again. I feel like we were a little bit ahead of the curve on that one a couple episodes back. We had already talked about Zegras, so I'm going to possibly forego talking about that again. One individual I do want to talk about is Kirby Dach. Let's talk about Kirby Dach for a second. All right, he's back on the ice. We've seen the clips on X or Twitter or whatever that he's skating around and he's wearing more or less full equipment again, and this is a very good sign. But there's been a bunch of things that I've been reading and been listening to that I kind of wanted to get your guys' opinion on. And the big question about Kirby Dach is he your 2C? Does he fit the bill? Is he locked in now? Are we good there? Does Kent Hughes and Gorton look elsewhere to fill out the roster? Or are they also, and should, very importantly, be looking to upgrade at 2C? And so I just wanted to get your opinions about that, gentlemen. What do you think? Is Kirby Dach your guy? Start next season. He's your 2C, locked and loaded. Vito first, please.
Yes. Well, I won't look to upgrade because at some point, you can't keep upgrading and hoping that you're going to get the guy. Now, with that being said, if all of a sudden they get a can't miss 2C or a 1C that brings Suzuki down to 2C, then you kind of have to figure out what you're going to do with Kirby Dach. But right now, as it stands, with the players they have, I'm okay with Kirby Dach being the 2C. The only thing that sucks is we haven't seen enough of him in that position because he got hurt very early on in the season. So, but everything we said, even when the Habs acquired him, I was stoked about it. I love the upside. I love the potential from him. I didn't care about all the bad press that was coming with him with his injury history in Chicago. Chicago, we knew, was a mess at that point. So it was actually a good thing that he left. They were not using him very well. It was like 3C barely. And it wasn't because of his talent. It's just because they wanted him to be something else. And they were actually suffocating his offensive talent. So now him coming to Montreal and being the 2C guy where everybody sees he's got the upside to even be a 1C, I'm still willing to put some time and stock onto this guy to develop into the player that we hope he can be, to develop into the center that we have seen glimpses of even at the end of last season, and unfortunately just 2 games this year. But I'm going into next season knowing that position is reserved for Dach unless they got somebody that is a can't miss home run 1C and then shifts Suzuki down.
Okay, but that's not going to happen.
It's not. So
right. So let's take that scenario, because of course that is a very common thing that a lot of people suggest, that you can't not make calls. If somebody's available or someone's potentially on the market, you got to kick tires. I get that, guys. I understand. I want to know, though, when you start looking at your roster, right? And I think this is what you're pretty much getting to, and I'm in agreement. We'll get to Dave in a second that I feel is not in agreement, and that's kind of why I wanted to ask this. But at some point, you gotta put your chips in. This is a guy you got to be your 2C. He's your 2C. He's been injured. You
got a first-round pick for in trading Romanov to then go and acquire him and use a first round. And
this was your plan. You gotta ride that plan. Exactly. That's how I kind of feel about it. Also, Dave, tell us why we're wrong.
I'm actually not going to say you're wrong. I think that the Canadiens do have the luxury a bit of time in the sense that they get to see a little bit next year. It's not a pressing year. They get to see what they have in Kirby Dach. Now, do I put him in pen as a 2C going forward? The guy's played 60 games with the Canadiens, and he's coming off, not so great years in Chicago, some injury issues, and that didn't really end in Montreal. We could talk all we want about bad luck and whatnot, but I mean, they're there, right? He missed an entire season out of 2. So that's a lot to say. So again, he was good for a short stretch, or I guess a longest stretch in one garbage season with the Canadiens. I need to see more of it. I need to see more to see if you could rely on this guy being your 2C going forward. And I don't think it should hinder any talks about bringing in another guy. I don't think you say, oh man, Kirby Dach's got it so locked down that we don't need to spend any time looking at that position. I think that you have to do your due diligence, But at the end of the day, I'm willing to see what Kirby Dach how he develops in that 2C role. But guys, he's played 60 games. Like we need to see a lot more bigger sample size before you can start locking him in as your 2C, in my opinion.
I think that's super fair though, but I think it's an important aspect to remind people that you have to let him play. We have to know what we have with him. And so if that's going to be the case when he comes back next season, you can't be looking in the offseason, and you shouldn't be prioritizing finding yourself a second center when you have a Kirby Dach. He should be put there. He should be given the length of rope required for him to see what he can do. Right?
I don't think it's the priority is to go and look for a 2C or a 1C. You know, if they happen to get one and they land one that's like, okay, this player is, you know, right off the bat, he's better than what they have, then you go for it. The other thing too with Kirby Dach is you have the versatility of he's able to play wing if they don't acquire a certain center that's infinitely better and is a proven true number 1 or 2 center, not a Dvorak of the world. I'm talking about a proven one, and I can't think of a name off the top of my head right now. But just to say, then if you shift Dach to the left or to the right, that whole line just gets that much better, because at the end of the day, it's easier for a center to go wing than it is for a wing to go center. We've seen that. It's been proven. It's been a horrible test that we've done in the past. The Montreal Canadiens have done in the past. So
for sure.
I wouldn't mind all of a sudden if they managed to get a proven 2C who's above 50% in the faceoff circle, and and Dach shifts to the left or the right, and then you have a new hook there to complement them, then that could possibly work too. But to make it a priority in the off season, I think the Canadiens have other assets that they need to go and try, and other positions that they need to address before they go and say, oh, you know what, the Dach experiment that we were going for and our plan of him being our 2C, because it looks like that was the plan, it's done. They didn't see enough of him. If they would have gone 30, if you would have played 30, 40 games and you would have had bad stretches where they're like, yeah, you're really struggling down the middle, then you change your plan a bit, or you might have a different idea of what you're going to do.
I'm just asking the question because a lot of people have been really high on the first line, right? We've been talking about Montreal now has a first line. You've been hearing in media, you've been hearing people, okay, they had a bad game last game against Buffalo, and the streak ended there for both Suzuki and Slafkovsky for their point streaks at the time of this recording. But let's say you have your first line. A lot of people are suggesting, okay, you have your first line, but the Habs need everything else. Everything else. They need upgrades everywhere else. You always look to make your team better. But at some point, like, I kind of take an exception with that statement a bit, because you have players and you got players that you need to put in spots, and that has to be the guy that's got to stay there for a bit to see what you have. I know Dach has been injured. I know he has a history of injuries. I know he didn't really exceed in Chicago, but there's context to that. He's been now in Montreal. From when he has played in Montreal, he's been very, very good, both at center and at wing. I just think that if you're going to start putting the roster together and you say your number 1 line is now locked and you got those 3 locked, because bear in mind, before he went down, a lot of people had Kirby Dach as that top line winger, right? Mm-hmm. And Slaf was playing on a second line with nobody, right? And so now Slaf all of a sudden finds chemistry and he's there, and now Dach kind of gets not put down the totem pole, but moved into the focal point of the second line. And so I disagree with put him there.
I disagree with the statement that you said that people are saying that, Montreal needs upgrades outside of that first line. You can't say that, because the guy who was supposed to be our 2C and the distributor of all of that and really drive that line is not there. So they could have had 2 really strong lines, even when Monahan was there too. So in the end, they lost the main driver of the second line. So maybe they're
who's the second line? Say he's not injured. Who's your second line of the Canadiens this season right now?
Well, now here you go. Now we're gonna answer that question. The priority is gonna end up being on the right side, because I don't put Josh Anderson there, but it would be Dach and Newhook. They went and paid another first round pick to add Newhook to that second line, most likely. And I've said it when they acquired Newhook that he's a guy, the way he's built and the way he is, he's better suited for top 6 minutes. Not a number 1, not a first line. So when you looked at it at the beginning of the season before Dach went down, okay, the hope was that Slafkovsky would have been the number 1. We said it in previous episodes that eventually Slafkovsky was going to be the number 1 right winger or the number 1 left winger, depending how they wanted to shift that and depending how they were going to utilize it. Then what was the second line? We said, well, okay, Dach is definitely number 2, your number 2 center. And we were like, okay, Newhook is going to be out there because he can't be a 4th line guy. then we were like, okay, it's going to probably be Josh Anderson or Monahan that are going to be on the right until Monahan gets traded, or until they acquire somebody. That's the key piece there. That's where they need to focus. They need to go and get that winger for that second line. That's where the focus needs to be, or two, depending what they do. But that's the focus, because now Josh Anderson, this year is a bad year. He's had a lot of chances. I think the window of opportunity to trade him, if it was gone. I know that I was one of those people that saw that he's got all the tools to make things work, but it just didn't work this year. He could create space and whatever. So I do think that the experiment is done. I don't want him as a top 6 right winger anymore. Just if he's on your third line, creating space, causing a bit of havoc, and he's your third line right winger, I can deal with that. His cap, while the cap is going up, is not so bad. Not so bad, but it's bad right now. But that's Gallagher. He's got demoted to the fourth line. He's not keeping up. So Montreal's priority in the offseason is addressing that right wing top 6 player that they're going to need, and it has to be somebody that's offensively gifted. It's got to be a talented person. Dach is your 2.
Let me pick up what you just threw down and pose the question to Dave.
Mm-hmm.
Do they have to wait until the offseason, or does this trade deadline present the opportunity for them to go and get that guy fit the top 6, the winger that's missing?
I mean, you have whenever you can swing that deal, you got to make it. A lot of people are sold on this top line, and they had a good stretch, but like there's still a chance that this line doesn't produce at a level. Like, you guys can't tell me that you haven't seen a 30-40 game stretch of a good line, and then the next year you have to work on it, man. And you can't just be sold. This is your first line. We're good. We don't need talent anymore. We have our first line and potentially our second line. We need one guy all of a sudden. Like, the Canadiens are one offensive guy away from contending for a Stanley Cup.
Well, nobody's saying contending for a Stanley Cup.
But
that's the plan, right? You're doing a 5-year plan. We're going to be on year 3 next year of Kent Hughes. You need to start formulating and molding your team.
But that's it. You can't constantly be looking to upgrade that top line, though. If you see the chemistry, now you have to say, even though they're going to have down spurts because they're a young line, if that's your line, it changes the whole context when you're going out to the market. If you're looking to upgrade a number 1 line versus upgrade 2
guys,
there's a big
contenders
difference.
Have number 1 guys on their second line. John Tavares and William Nylander are going to put up 100 points on a second line. Like, you see it all the time. It's not just reserved for one line and then the second line has a huge drop off anymore. That you don't need to see that anymore. And if you're building your team that way, in my opinion, is the wrong way to build a team. You can't just stop looking for talent because all of a sudden your guys.
Oh, but nobody's suggesting that we stop.
But you are. You're saying you can't.
No, we're saying prioritization. If there's, like I'm saying, when you go into a game plan in the off season or at the trade deadline, and you're looking to swing for the fences, grand slam versus trying to get a respectable double or a triple, there's a difference. There's a difference when you're out there and you're looking to make those trades, because you're asking John Tavares and William Nylander are not available. You're not going to go get a trade for these kind of guys.
But we're not talking about who's available. You're talking about trying to find somebody and whether or not you should try to find or stop looking for a first line player because all of a sudden you have your first line. And that to me is a crazy way of thinking.
Prioritization. Let's clarify. I'm saying they need to start prioritizing further down.
They need to prioritize more talent, guys. They need scoring talent, man. Like,
don't disagree.
It's crazy that you guys look at like a 20-game stretch where the first line is performing well, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, we're sold at the first line. No touch. The Habs have found the first line. How many times have you said that? Max Domi got 70 points. Oh, all of a sudden we found, like, people drop off. People don't play. The chemistry stops. It happens all the time. You can't just be comfortable again in a losing season where nothing means anything and people are not game planning with a first line like that. You can't.
Well, it's like I degree. Hold on. It's like I said, the Habs need to prioritize an offensive talent for the top 6. I did say that, but when they're going to go into the off season or even at the trade deadline, which is less likely to happen because teams are strapped for cash and all that, but when they're going to go in the off season, they're not going to be like, oh, let's look at what we're going to prioritize. Let's go get more defense. They have an abundance of prospects coming, so let's go focus on top 6 offensive talent. But I don't disagree. That's what we've been saying. But right now, you're looking at it and saying, when you look at the whiteboard and they're doing their lines, they're going to say, okay, we got our first, even if you want to shift them as a second line eventually because you got even more talent. But let's say that's their first line. Next year, we're going to start the season opening day. This is our line. We need to do something about that second line. The bottom six has never been a problem for Montreal. They've always found players that can
so
serviceable.
I'm confused. You guys are sold with you're sold with the Habs top line. You're sold with the bottom six. You're sold with Kirby Dach at center, and Vito, you're sold at Newhook at left, and you're sold on their defense.
Hold on.
The Habs are one right winger, second line right winger away from being an amazing team.
Hold on. I'm not sold. I'm not sold on Newhook. I'm not sold on Newhook. I'm saying that Newhook was acquired. You got to give him the chance, but at the same time, Newhook was the type of player that you can't grab him and be like, go be a fourth line player. He's just not made. His game is not that way. So when you're looking at the lineup going into next season, what are they going to likely prioritize unless they make this massive splash where they just overhaul everybody they just recently acquired? Okay, is going to be like, okay, they're likely going to focus on getting a top six player for the right side for the second line.
Obviously, that's their priority. But we're not we're talking about like you said. Are you comfortable with your top line and Kirby Dach at 2C? And then now what I'm hearing is that bottom six is fine, defense is fine, Kirby Dach at 2C is fine, top line is fine. So you're literally two players borderline. Unless Newhook hits, you're one
context away. Hold on a second. The context is very important, right? I'm comfortable with the top line as it is now, that they don't have to go and look for prioritizing a top dog because of where they're at in the rebuild. I like to see this line continue to evolve and continue to grow and see more of that 20-game sample size and extend and see the chemistry and keep that going. But at some point, you got to put your chips on the table and you got to lock down a damn line. And that's my line. I want that to be the number one line and see where that's going to progress in 2 more years. I think that all the talent in the world is there. I think the chemistry is building. Good. Now, today's point, I fully agree. You need more goals on this team. Do something. Find a way to get more goals. But you can get a guy who scores upwards of 30 goals, but he has lacks in defensive game and he has lacks elsewhere, and he's not a top dog. But he's a goal scorer. I want to find that guy. Get me that guy on that second line.
You want a Michael Ryder?
I want a Michael Ryder type, maybe a little bit more well-rounded. You know what I'm saying?
You guys are just, I feel like this fan base has just been around average for far too long to look at, and the excitement is there for players. Like, guys, like, I understand the top line's doing well. It's doing fantastic, okay? But, like, that's not, you can't build. You could build off of it, but you can't center it around the hope that this line stays like this amazingly going forward. And that's it. I'm fine with, let's see what we can do, but it shouldn't stop you from going and prioritizing getting goals and getting top end talent.
Most of the offensive superstar talents on the contenders that you're referring to were drafted. Okay, we can all agree to that. Most of them, like 98% of them. Even the first overall pick that we have right now that seems to be finally having his coming out party, finally, I mean, he's only 19 years old, is Slafkovsky. He was drafted first overall. So Montreal would have to draft, unless there's a guy out there that says, like Tavares, you mentioned Tavares, I'm going to use that example, says, I want to go to Toronto. I don't care what you guys do, make it happen, I'm going to Toronto. You need somebody to say, I want to go to Montreal. I like where they're going. I see what's happening with them. They have the right thing. I want to go to Montreal. Or it has to be somewhere where Montreal literally puts their chips in a different way than what Matt's alluding to and says, I'm putting all my stock on this talented player. I'm going to give them the world. I'm going to go and acquire them.
Guys, but none of that. Ton of teams like Vegas didn't draft anybody, any of those guys. Like Tkachuk was traded. The freaking Huberdeau, whatever, he's having a bad year, but he was traded. Like these guys get traded all the time. You can go get. You're not Mark Bergevin saying, "Oh, you can't get these guys."
Yeah, but hold on a second. Tkachuk wanted out and said he wasn't resigning.
You don't think that happens every year? How many stories? Dubois. Every year there's a story of somebody wanting out. Don't talk to me about Dubois. I know about Dubois. You guys have to catch up, but I knew about Dubois, okay? But what I'm saying is these stories happen every year. Top-end talent get moved. You just have to be the guy that gets them. And
but you have capital, don't you? Don't you have your currency that you're looking to spend? And if you're sitting there saying you're not sold on the top line, then that would mean you're going to be more tentative to spend some of this capital to go get a middling guy who can help you with goals, but doesn't really improve. But you can't keep holding your money. You got to spend. You got to make a
agree.
move.
I agree.
But if the move right now, if you're constantly sitting back saying, I'm not sold on that top line, I think whatever, Slaf is better suited for second line. He's not going to be, or Suzuki isn't really a 1C, or whatever your thing is about that top line. If you're looking to improve there, then it would probably be more like, well, I can't really spend my big currency now because I got to hold it in case there's a guy somewhere who's going to fill that spot. You're going to become gun shy to start doing something with your currency.
I don't think so. I don't think that's it. I mean, I think the currency is worth what it's worth, and you only move it. You're not going to move your good currency for a middling player, right? Just because you might have a big prospect or someone in mind going forward. I think you move it. And another point about this is that the teams that make these trades are the teams that are already in a position of strength. They're not desperate, because desperate teams can't swing these deals, which is why Bergevin never found his 1C, because everybody knew he was looking for a 1C and everyone was looking to swindle him. And that's why it never worked for him. But if you look at all these teams and where do all these players go? They go to good teams that already have solid lines in place. And you always deal from a position of strength. And right now, the Canadiens, seemingly from the outside looking in, have a good top line, a solid, real NHL top line. Now is the time to go try and make those moves. It's not when, oh man, everyone on my top line is struggling, let me go look for help. You're going to get swindled. You're going to get.
What does it take to make a move like that? Like, for example, you mentioned about Vegas, right? What did Vegas pay to get Eichel?
Yeah, they paid a lot, but you have to do it. You have to.
But they're rebuilding. Is now the time to do a move like that?
Maybe not now, no. But you could. You shouldn't just wait to when you're just a piece away. Like Jack Eichel is going to help the Vegas Golden Knights for years and years and years to come. Like Vegas didn't wait. Like I guess they were already Cup contenders. Vegas is a very weird example, a team to pull as an example, but. They were a team. They didn't just say like, "Oh, we'll be better in 2 years. Let's wait on Jack Eichel." Jack Eichel became available, and they made the move. And that's what the Canadiens. I'm not saying that they should work their call every single thing. Like if a situation arises, they shouldn't just sit back and be like, "Nah, we're good. We have a first line. We don't
always kick tires." I mean, it's the same thing like we heard about the Zegers thing. Like, 5 teams called, right? From Pierre LeBrun, he said 5 teams called to see what's up, and Montreal's one of. You always kick tires. You always do your job. I'm not saying don't do your job. I'm just saying that I believe at some given point you have to go, like Vito's saying, on your whiteboard, and you got to put names there, and you got to say that's it. Now I need to prioritize elsewhere, which means I'm not calling and I'm not looking around for the disgruntled superstar on another team to give an overpay to go bring that guy in. I want to go bring a guy in who's not a 110-point player, but I want a guy who, if he plays here under our structure with this line, he could be an 80-point player.
There's nothing stopping you from doing that as well as looking out for a big fish.
I disagree. I think you have to prioritize. But it is one or the other.
Why is it one or the other? They have a ton of
assets. It changes how you go about doing your dealings. If you want both, and you got the currency to only spend for one,
but
and a guy who's of the 80-point value is there, and he's like, well, give me everything, and he's yours. You're like, yeah, but I kind of also want the bigger dog, so you don't pull the trigger.
Guys, the Habs have like a highly touted draft prospects in their system right now that apparently all the teams are calling on. They have a ton of defense. They have a ton of draft picks. Like the capital is there to make moves. You're not trading over the next 3 years. They have how many first-round picks? 4 or maybe more. I don't. You're not trading 4 first-round picks for a middling guy.
4.
You're not trading 4 first-round picks for a middling guy, right?
No.
So
they've got 4 first-round picks in the next 2 years.
Yeah.
In the next 2 years,
in Calgary and
22 or 23 picks total over the next.
So let's talk 3 years. 3 years, you have 5 first-round picks. You're not dealing that for a meddling guy, so you could go get your mid. I don't say why I say middling. Okay, your middle guy.
Yeah,
you're not trading 5 first-round picks for that. You're not trading your top prospects for that. So you can go get that and still have pieces to move to go get bigger fish down the line. I think it's crazy to think that way. I think it's crazy to say like, no, we're so stacked that we're just going to sit on this and get a second line winger. Hope he develops perfectly. Hope our Kirby Dach doesn't get injured again. Hope he develops into the second line center and see what's going forward. Because the years are creeping up, man. It's going to be year 4 before you know it. And then all of a sudden the pressure's on and everything's starting. And that's when you start making panic moves to try to save your job or to try to get things going. And that's when you're in a position of strength. I firmly believe right now the Canadiens are in a position of strength to be making some moves.
I think you could bring 100 Habs fans on this podcast. We wouldn't have enough space on the screen, but you can, and all 100 are going to say they need high offensive talent. You could bring every analyst of the Montreal Canadiens, and they're going to come out and say the same thing. They need that one player that takes them over the edge. That that's why you're hearing the names of sometimes people are talking about, like we spoke last episode, the Kaprizovs of the world, and you need that one star, that name, that player that not only is the name but comes with the package that's going to take the top six to an entirely different level. We don't disagree on that. All of us are going to agree on that. But when I'm looking and I'm making the lines to start with the current roster that they have, there's a massive hole and a question mark on the right side in the top six. Whether you want to move Slafkovsky down or you want to keep that line intact, which I would keep that line intact, because eventually you got to stop shuffling the lines if you don't want to keep, using the blender for that stuff. That's where you have to look and say, whether it's free agency, whether it's via trade, whether it's draft, they need to get that player. They need to get that player that you look and say, okay, our top six, this is our lock going into 2020, the 2024-2025 season. We need to round out the rest of the team and address other places and other positions. 100%. That's why I keep saying it's not they're one or two players away from going in contend for the cup. But right now, if we're looking at the roster in this rebuild, that's the focus. The focus has to be finding, because the Josh Anderson, the Gallaghers of the world, it's not working to be in the top six. It's done. It's got to stop.
The question, I don't think, in my opinion, was not what's the only thing that you need to do in the off season.
No, we're 25 minutes in, well past where I went with my question. But realistically, this is the domino effect of that question, and it's good that we went down this road because it's not that simple. People saying, what do you have in Kirby Dach? Are you comfortable Kirby Dach being your 2C? You haven't seen enough, this, that, whatever. A lot of people taking the stance that you got to give them the time. You got to see what's going to be there. And now is the time to do that because they're in the rebuild. So don't go out. Don't start really looking hard for an improvement there. Pencil him in and see what you got. I think, and that's the big thing. To Dave's point, he's right. I mean, you always look. And do they need the superstar? Absolutely. And should you always be calling? Absolutely. I'm just kind of thinking, kind of where I think you're also at, Vito, where you gotta leave what you have that's gelling and give it its time to gel. And they're not close to their ceiling yet. You don't know what you have in Slav, in Caufield, even in Suzuki. They might even take another step, 2 steps, or maybe this is it.
But
you don't know. You got to give it the time.
But guys, even if they do, is it so bad that you have, if you go out and get a guy and then all of a sudden Nick Suzuki takes the next step, are you really saying like, oh man, Nick Suzuki took a step, we're screwed now? No, you're even better. You're holding even better hands.
Nobody's saying that, but at the same time,
is that you got to let these guys grow. They're going to grow whether you have another superstar on your team or not. They're not just gonna be stagnant. They went to go get a star. I'm gonna stick at 60 points a year for the rest of my career.
For the first time for as long as I can remember, you could look and say Montreal Canadiens have a line that literally could stay in place, and say that's your first line for now. Doesn't mean that the first line that exists today can be shifted down to the second line because they went to get 3 other players that became that are far more talented and just contribute more. Nobody's saying that, but we don't have a duo. It's not just a duo anymore, or one player that can drive everything and feed it to a bunch of guys that on other teams would be a 4th line player. Like Montreal has had several of those over the years. For the longest times, Montreal centers have been, I've said it, Placanets, Desharnais, Danault, etc. And it's like, how are these, like, what are we doing here? Now we can look and say, we've got a first line. Now the only debate is Nick Suzuki a first line center? Or would he be better as a second line center? That's our conversation now. We could actually say we've got somebody.
Hey, in a perfect world, they go and spend all the draft capital and get superstars across the board, and our present first line becomes the second line. Today's point, yeah, I'm not going to be upset about that. That's a great scenario. I just think that it's about prioritization. Really, that's my key word that I'm focusing on, because at the end of the day, you have players, you have albatrosses on this team like Anderson right now, Gallagher, Dvorak, for example. Where do these guys go? They make far too much money, and but you got to find a way how, right? That's a priority. A priority is Matheson, for example. This is another polarizing guy. you got half the fan base that hates this kid and wants him jettisoned to the moon, and the other half's like, he might have the most points for a defenseman since Markov, and he's your number one defenseman. I don't know, man. Everywhere I read, people are like, get Matheson out of here. He's terrible. Matheson has blinders on. He doesn't see Slafkovsky on the power play. Matheson is useless defensively.
Maybe on his role, maybe in certain roles, he's not the greatest answer to a lot of things, but I don't know if there's a hated.
Yeah.
I'm
telling you, I find the conversation and a lot of people, and I think the dialogue about Matheson is an incredibly interesting one, because I think if you take a poll across the fan base, you are going to find smack dab down the middle. Half the fan base looks at him as a 1-2 defenseman who you keep for the longevity of his career, and the other half wants him gone as soon as humanly possible while he's hot. It's crazy. There's no middle ground. I find there's no middle ground.
There's only one way to figure out if this is true, and that is to do an X poll as soon as this episode ends, and I pose that question to our fans.
What, do you hate Matheson? Is that what you're gonna put?
That's what Matt's saying.
Listen, I'm taking what I'm reading. I don't see the words like I hate this player, but I'm seeing majority of the comments are either keep him forever. He's the best defenseman we've had in forever. He's going to put up close to 60 points. Go find another defenseman that can do that, and they'll work on his defensive game. And the other half is you got to get rid of him now, because he's going to be a liability defensively. He doesn't fit the mold. He's not a quarterback on the power play. Don't get blinded by his points. Strike while the iron's hot. Move him.
Well, I think a lot of the people, and if he is getting some hate, which I haven't seen, but if he is getting some hate, it's likely because what you're seeing from this guy is that it's very reminiscent of Jeff Petrie. It's a guy who was miscast, and in an ideal situation, Matheson is on the second pairing and probably driving the second power play. Okay, not the first guy, not the go-to guy. And while he is putting up the points, there's been many defensemen throughout the history of the NHL who have been offensive producers and weren't so strong on the defense in terms of the defensive game. Matheson is actually pretty good. He's a very good skater. There's no reason to hate him, but I think that a contingent of this fan base wants to see the trades, wants to see, oh, you know what, do it, trade him right now, because you could get another first-round pick, or you could go get something pretty big, and things like that. They want to see that type of, like, get ready for the draft because it's a rebuild year. Move. He's older. By the time they're ready, I get that. By the time Montreal is ready, where's Matheson going to be at? But at the same time, you can't have a roster full of kids, and he is very good for the Montreal Canadiens right now. There's no reason to move on him unless somebody comes out and blows them out of the water with a trade that's like, we have to. We don't want to, but we have to. Okay? And I don't see any team right now that's going to be able to absorb his cap, give that kind of package that these fans think that Montreal is going to get for Mike Matheson today. So you're better off keeping him. And even if you move him, then what are you going to do? What are you going to have next year and the year after that to play on the right side? Another kid? It's going to be Jaden Struble all of a sudden moving up to the top pair? Like, you can't do that. So it's more about the people wanting to just see the trade happen, because I think, I'm sorry to bring up Josh Anderson again, but I think there's some PTSD there, because last year was the window of opportunity to really move him and maximize your return for something like Josh Anderson. I think this year his value to a certain degree has plummeted. And I think that people think that that's what's going to happen to Mike Matheson.
Go ahead,
yeah,
Dave.
I mean, I can see that. Look, Mike Matheson, I didn't even know this was an issue, to be honest. And maybe I'm not on the same Reddit sites as you guys are, but Mike Matheson is obviously miscast as a top defensive pairing. And anyone who doesn't see that is blinded. He's obviously miscast. He's perfectly suited, and he does perfectly well. And he's a guy from here. He's a hometown boy. Leave Mike Matheson alone. He's doing fine.
Digestible cap. His cap is very digestible when you think of where the cap is going and what he's producing. It's a very digestible. Like, how many NHL defensemen are you going to get that are mobile and productive like he is, and at $4.875 million, under $5 million?
And he's developed. The worst part is he's developing well. Like, I know it's going to be probably too late by the time they contend, but he's developing well. I mean, he's improving. His play is not going downhill, in my opinion. So
he has 41 points. Hold on a second. He has 41 points in 56 games this season.
Very good.
Right? So you tack on another 20 plus, 25 plus games. I mean, he could hit close to 50 something points for the season.
Yeah.
It's a lot. He's a point producing offensive defenseman. That said, I understand he plays for the Canadiens, and I know that plus minus for a lot of people is a very polarizing topic, but he's a minus 18. He's 29 years old.
Rebuilding year.
Okay.
So,
But maybe what I'm seeing, I know a lot of people, and I know that the fun fact of social media and the anonymity, people get really crazy when they see something. Like, I know the biggest thing they talk about is him on the power play and ignoring Slafkovsky and taking shots from the blue line through 19 different people and not looking for the outlet. I get it. And that's why you want to send him to the moon. I understand. But he is an offensive, talented defenseman. He is also 29. You just said it. In 4 years or in 3 years when this team is competitive, is Mike Matheson on your team? Do you see him here? And if he's not, then maybe he is. Maybe now is the time.
Hold on. Jeff Petrie was traded well into his 30s, and Montreal got 2 returns for him. So when the time comes, if Mike Matheson is still producing at the rate that he's producing now, they're gonna have no problems trading him. You think that because you put him on the trade block with 2 years, with another 2 years remaining after this season at 4.875, that every team can just fit Mike Matheson in? Even if you're going to move him, it won't be at the trade deadline. It's an off-season move. On top of that, you're going to talk about plus minus. Yes, it's a polarizing topic, so I'm not going to dive deep into this. But Montreal is currently, today, would be drafting 7th. They're a bottom 8 team. Did you really expect, when you're watching this team, that their players are going to be a plus 20 something? No, they're going to be in the minuses more often than not because they're losing more often than not. They're allowing more goals. They just went through 2 games over their last 10, 15 game stretch where they allowed 7 goals. What do you expect? It's a rebuilding year. I look at this. I don't even look at the plus minus for this team because they should be all minuses right now. I
don't disagree in the slightest. In fact, if anything, I want Mike Matheson to stay. I'm simply seeing what's out there, which I find curious, and I'm presenting you
voice of the voiceless
to see what's up. I know because I disagree with the voices, but I just happened to see it and I thought it was fascinating why he's getting so much of this kind of either really dislike or really like. Most people are kind of like meh. You know what I mean?
I think it's in the moment, Matt. It's like when you're seeing that play in the middle of a game where you see someone like Slafkovsky that was totally open and he didn't pass it because he had the blinders on or whatever. People are saying that's when if you would have passed it to Slafkovsky, you would have guaranteed scored and you get
listen,
trade him, get rid of him. You know,
yes and no, right? It's those moments that are leading to people to feeling the way that they're feeling, certainly. But it's the fact that he makes these moments happen often. That you keep hearing about it and you keep seeing it. If it was one game, people would be like, "Oh my God, it was so bad," and you'd move on. But he does have the tendency. Let's be very frank about this. Mike Matheson is not a defensive stalwart. He's not a good defensive defenseman. He lacks defensive qualities for a defenseman, but he is an offensive producing defenseman on a team that desperately needs offense.
He's a puck moving defenseman.
So that's his role.
Off the rush.
That's my point.
The problem
is when you see him do these things, you got to give him a bit of slack.
The problem is that again, we're in a rebuilding team and he's miscast. Because if we weren't a rebuilding team, okay, if the Montreal Canadiens weren't in this rebuild and they had all their pieces in place, you wouldn't see Mike Matheson on the top pair eating 24, 25 minutes a game. He would have been on the second pair, and you'd look and say, we got Mike Matheson on the second pair. And don't forget what they traded to acquire him. If he was a first pairing top elite number 1 defenseman and Montreal would have actually acquired him, it would have cost a fortune, not a Jeff Petrie and a bunch of other things. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, at the end of the day, he is doing exactly what we expected to. In fact, I would even say he's doing more than we expected to, because a lot of people, those same fans that are saying get rid of and clamoring, probably saying to get rid of Mike Matheson, we're probably saying it was the dumbest move they could have done. Mike Matheson is going to be a bust. He's going to be this. And it's 2 seasons. He's 40-plus points, and he's been a good room guy, and he's signed for less than $5 million. He's signed for less than even Jeff Petrie. I'm sorry to bring up Jeff Petrie again, but that's what got him Mike Matheson here. So what are you going to treat? Go get another first-round pick. What are the Montreal Canadiens going to do with another first-round pick? It's going to be another asset for them to go trade and something else. And you probably what? You can't be just kids.
Listen. Whoa.
To be fair, guys, for those who don't know, we pay Vito by Jeff Petrie mentions. So
yes,
that's how it's working.
That's it.
I got $4.
I got a bunch more things to ask, but we're kind of pushing on our time now. So instead of asking you guys, I'm going to ask this to anybody who's listening out of curiosity. Feel free to comment about anything of the things that you heard and about how you feel about Dach. We'd be curious to see that in the comments. If you're comfortable with him at 2C, or should the Habs really keep going out and finding improvements there, as well as Matheson. What are your feelings about it? Am I just following the wrong people and I'm getting the wrong sense and that everybody here seems to love him? Or do you guys also see a lot of the concerns with Matheson and you would like to move him as soon as possible? We'd like to know those. In addition to the third question that was not asked here, but I'm just curious. What would you do? How would you deal with the three following players? Gallagher, Anderson, and Dvorak. Because they do not fit on this team anymore. But they are too big of contracts with too much term. And I would love to know what kind of sorcery you guys can come up with, those listening and you two for next episode, by the way, to let me know how do you deal with this? Because Gallagher on the fourth line, Anderson being invisible, and Dvorak, hurt. Again. But like, let's be real. What do you do? What do you do with these three guys? I would love to know your feelings about that. So please let us know in the comments as well. And if you haven't already, consider liking and subscribing. Thank you so much for that. We've been noticing a big uptick, and we really, really appreciate it. So, gentlemen, for Dave and Vito, I'm Matt, and this was
Get Pucked.